The call for change in response to problems with racial climate at Boston Latin School is growing. Our guest is also expanding the call for change to the entire Boston public school system. We'd like to welcome the founder and director of the New Democracy Coalition, Kevin Peterson. Thank you very much for being with us, Kevin.
Glad to be here, always.
I know you were on recently, and even at that point, you were talking about saying that the headmaster ought to be replaced. Given what has since come out with the investigation by the school department and some of the questions in the community, how do you feel right now?
Well, I'm not satisfied with the tone and tenor and content of the report that was released late last week. I feel even more committed to pushing my view that the headmaster should step down. But more than that, I think there are opportunities to engage in defining what policy needs to be developed in wake of this, not only at Boston Latin School. It's clear that things need to change there policy-wise in terms of hiring more teachers and increasing creating a more diverse student population that somewhat reflects the demography of the city. But there also needs to be changes in terms of developing anti-racism curriculum and comportment among the student population.
Well, the school department's finding was that the administrators at Latin seriously dropped the ball on one incident, which sounded pretty serious, but otherwise they seem to have been pretty responsive. Plus, they have these new steps they're taking. Given all of that, you still think that there are...
I think the report, Chris, is quite frankly inconclusive and quite frankly not to be believed. The local president of the Boston NAACP branch questions the validity of the report as he met with additional students just over this weekend. In fact, there was a report that came into Mr. Curry about yet another student who was called the N-word by a teacher. And the student claims that report, that she was never interviewed about that incident. So I beg the question of whether the report is complete and whether or not we should depend on it. I believe that there should actually be an outside entity that comes in and does a scan, an environmental scan, a report, an investigation in terms of the racial climate at Boston Latin now, but also report on the incidents that have been reported around racism.
Chris, the other thing here is that when you respond to problems like this at a school, if somebody does something bad, you punish them and you let the person who was targeted know, supposedly, or tell their parents what's going on in some way. I'm wondering, I mean, isn't there something you need to do beyond that to make sure that the rest of the school understands that this is, you got to shape up here?
Yeah, and it's not clear. Aside from an assembly, I believe, that was held last spring in response to some of the racial tweets on social media, a volunteer assembly which was sparsely attended. I don't believe that there's been any serious punishment, for lack of a better word, in terms of those who may have committed the crime, and there's been no very clear environment set within the school that the context of slurs of this nature are not to be tolerated.
What about the rest of the school system here? Because what you see here is we still have racial gap in achievement. We have declining black enrollment at Boston Latin. Yeah. So that's, in a way, maybe a bigger problem.
Yeah, Boston Latin in some ways is the canary in the mine. It is indicative of more systemic problems that need to be addressed in Boston, but not only in Boston, but across the Commonwealth. There is a need, for example, for a stricter anti-bullying law, which is a state law. Which currently allows, in some ways, the schools to interpret both the law and the punishment and protocols around anti-bullying, and what's the response to that. But there also needs to be a real check on diversity among the teachers across the school system in Boston. Right now, Boston is not in compliance with the federal court decree that says there should be at least 25% African American teachers and 10% other minority teachers. That's not happening. So, and there is a dearth of funding. As it is now, the Boston Public Schools may be cut by $53 million there must be much more money beyond a cut like that to invest in our early childhood education, so that the competition to get into Latin is provided, or I should say the resources to engage in the competition to get into a school like Latin is present across school systems, across the school system. So this moment provides an opportunity for real structural reforms that are focused at Boston Latin, but extend beyond the Boston Public Schools, but also can be made across the Commonwealth.
Superintendent Chang, shortly after he took over, he said that he wants to expand access to advanced work programs. Is that enough, or you think more needs to be
Well,
done?
I think that's a good start, and that needs to, that desire needs to be put on steroids, because currently there is so much inequity, particularly among elementary schools across the city, that there is really no competition against young students who go to parochial schools or go or attend private schools within the city of Boston. Really monopolize, cannibalize in some ways those slots at Boston Latin. So there also should be maybe a change of the calculus that for which one enters a school like Boston Latin. Perhaps if we added points to a student who took the exam, if they've been in the system, the public school system, all their lives, they should be rewarded for being in the public system and not be victimized by other students who've had the opportunity to be in private schools and parochial schools, which gives them an advantage, quite frankly.
The importance of having at least a reasonable number of black teachers at Boston Latin School. I mean, a lot of people say, well, there aren't that many black students there, so what's the big deal about black teachers? But if you had more black teachers there, how would that help?
Well, I think it changes the entire environment of the school. More black teachers for students would mean that students will have access to more black teachers, camaraderie, and the black teachers provide silently and sometimes not so silently a role model for African American students. That's been proven scientifically. So there needs to be a drastic change. 8% African American students at Boston Latin, when the demography of the city is vastly different for African Americans, it's just not acceptable. There needs to be a change at the school.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Kevin Peterson from